technology has surely been a driving force in shaping Gaudi's take on the new age. In our next theme, we will be focusing on designing in and with technology. In keeping up with the summit's agenda, the interaction of design and technology has enabled enormous advancements in the design sector. It has allowed for cost and energy efficiency, design and construction integration, streamlined collaborations, and convenience in converting abstract visions to life. These developments have provided design thinkers innumerable mediums to express their design manifestations. Elaborating on the subject further, we have Mr. Anssi Lassila, the founder and director of OOPEAA, office at the Oulu School of Architecture. His architecture combines a sculptural form with the traditional materials with innovative techniques. Placing the human being at the center, he has a keen interest in exploring the potential of wood as a sustainable solution in developing new systems of modularity. His personal experience in working with wood extends from building with hand-carved logs to the use of CLT. Mr. Lassila will be in a dialogue with Mr. Naresh Narasimhan, the principal architect and managing partner, Venkataramanan Associates, Bengaluru. Mr. Naresh is a practitioner and leader with over 34 years of experience in architecture and urban design. His contribution to urban development as an urbanist is creative entrepreneur has been far-reaching. He is also the co-founder of BATF, Bangalore Agenda Task Force, co-founder of MOD Foundation, and chairman of Link Innovation. Thank you, sir, for being a part of this summit, both as a speaker and as an advisory board member. We welcome you, Mr. Anssi and Mr. Naresh. Viewers, a note to you, we'll be taking the questions after this session, so feel free to send them in the chat box, in the Zoom and the live chat box. Over to you, sir.
Good morning. I think Anssi has not come online yet.
He's here.
Yeah. Can you switch on video?
Yes, I'm here. Can you see my video?
Yeah. Hello. Good morning, Anssi.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning to all of you. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this session of the ADM Summit, Designing and in and with Technology. So, Anssi, I think we will start off with a small presentation from your side, and then we will, as we discussed, we'll get into a question and answer session after that. Can you share your screen, please?
Yes, I can. Let's see. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, you have to make it full screen. So,
full screen now. Okay.
Excellent.
Thanks for the invitation. It's rather early in Finland. It's 6 o'clock. So it's. I'm sorry if my brains are not on, but I'll try my best. Okay. First, I will a little bit talk about what we are doing and how we working in that part of the globe, just because we are quite north, and I think it's quite different perspective than in India. I have been only once in India and visit there. I don't like it many ways, but of course I see the difference between these cultures. But I'm talking a bit about working and using technology and future possibilities. And after that small presentation, we will talk more about these things. So first, I start my career to understanding the traditional way to make buildings and then use the wood materials, because we have wood around Finland. It's about 70% of the whole country it's a wood covering, and it means that we naturally use the wood in the old ways, many ways. So it's a natural and basic material in our country, and learning for the past, learning for the old techniques is also very important to understand the material, how it really behaves, and what is the balance between the nature, and how it's possible to use it also in the future. So first, I make a public buildings use the wood materials, and step by step move more to try to understand and learning about the technique, how to use the manufacturing, the new techniques, use the glue lamp, use the prefabrication, and that kind of things in the works. But in the same time, I also understand it's important to keep the local balance and local possibilities around the works. So there's always social aspect and social thing what is as important as architecture. So it's also important part of the making architecture. But in these days, we are that well-known problem that CO2 emissions comes quite big part of that. It's just buildings and building sector and using the buildings. So we must find a way to make things in a different way. And in Nordic sector, it's quite natural to try to use the wood in a large scale, manufacturing things more in the factories, and try to find more effective, more better way to do things in the using the wood material. And of course, that also opens the prefabrication. For example, the modular construction is one thing. How to use the modular construction that way that, okay, it's possible to prefabricate everything as much as possible. Make a combination about that's, for example, the Puukokka example, what we use, about 300 different volumetric elements combined together, and there's 8 different type of modules, and it makes the whole building block for about 200 apartments. So basically, it's just one example how to prefabricated everything. So when we make a foundations on the site, we make a prefabrication in the factory. But in the real life, this is quite manual, quite basic in still. It's not like a Tesla factory. I mean, this is not like a car industry that what is very effective for the process perspective. It's more about the hand making and doing it, just going inside the factory. But there's also technical layer. I mean, there's technical layer for the making the wood material. It's quite well organized and also using for the technical possibilities, but not in the next step. It's more tricky to get the evolution for that. And why we make it? Of course, we can build more faster, less noise, less pollution, and also better quality, and get the better final result. That's one example for the wooden housing project, what we have done. So the using the local material, using the local possibilities, it's also very important in these cases. But it's also effect for the solution. Of course, it's that way. It's the building. It's possible to build the elements, but it's also possible to take it away and move it to the other location. So basically, it changed also a little bit understanding or thinking what is the building. It's building can be also thing what you can move in a different location. But for example, this Puukokka case this is affordable housing in our country. It means that it's not very expensive. This is quite basic level apartment building in not social housing, but anyway, it's affordable. So that's a large scale example for the using the wood material. After that, we get the feedback a little bit for the people, and they get the developer things positive to make a large scale wood buildings, and they want to build more. And the people who lives there, they think that it's a wood apartment. It's 50% thinks that it's important thing, it's good, it's positive thing. But of course, the locations and basic things are even more important. And the fire safety, what is also a tricky question in many countries, but people who lives there, they thinks that it's very fire safety, and also that's important for the ecological footprint. And after that, we make, of course, calculations. What is the difference between the wood building and concrete building, and realize that, okay, there's 40% difference between that, but also there's a carbon storage, what is including the wood material in this case. And we developed a little bit the tool to understanding the ecological footprint very early stage of the designing process. So we starting that kind of research projects to understanding these possibilities and make the Yokotite tool, what is open source tool in the web, so everybody can a little bit check and understand the difference between the different materials in our European EPD data. And one example also for the using the prefabrication and new technique is floating structures, what we have now creating together with our client. So that kind of urban space extension to create the building system for that, and it's a scalable system, so we can make a different kind of combinations for that, and different kind of toolbox. So there's a different needs in different combinations. And there's just a few examples what it means. In Stockholm, we just get the building permission before summer, and it means that it's combination about the public space, restaurants, event space, and spa and pools, and that kind of like wellness things in floating building. And this case is also prefabricated totally, and it's possible to transport the building in the different location after 10 years or 20 years or later. So it also means that, okay, we built the buildings place where is no ground, where is no place to build it. So it's also possible to move it, use it, and move it to the new location later. But anyway, the basic thing behind everything is to make a beautiful spaces and a good quality and better quality for the people who use the buildings. And for example, this case is of course the brand or concept what we will explore the different locations in the group. Well, that's just example of what we had done, but thank you very much. That's my presentation. So.
Naresh, it's over to you, Naresh.
Yeah.
Naresh,
thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for that brief presentation. So we'll just get into a small discussion mode at this point. And can I get started? Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
You know, Anssi, as we have discussed before, we have explained that, you know, architects today have a lot of access to data and analytic systems for the data, you know, to be able to analyze what they do in a very clever way. And the other thing that we have discussed is that how is it that architects are the last to adopt technological innovation, whereas other industries and other designers seem to have moved much ahead of the architectural field, right? So one might argue that, you know, people have started building 3D printing their buildings and so on. But my view is that it only revolutionizes the conventional method of still building, you know, a foundation, a superstructure, and a roof. And just because you can do it with a 3D printer is not particularly evolutionary. It's probably interesting from a technological perspective. So the question I want to begin the conversation with is that many times when we run into a problem, we find that the solution, after much technological thinking, it goes back to something which has already happened in nature. Particularly Janine Benyus's book on biomimicry, that is innovation inspired by nature, aims to take inspiration from nature to solve a lot of particularly issues regarding climate change, how our buildings are responding to climate change. How can we learn? So my point is, how can we understand more innovation in technology and to further the principles of biomimicry in design?
Well, I think that's a very key question, because usually when we talk about the nature, we usually copy or imitate nature somehow. So it's just aesthetical imitation or that kind of things, or just try to repeat things what we have done the last like thousands of years. So I think that maybe we can using technology we can learn maybe something for the nature that way, that we try to understand how the nature works and how it really works and how it works balance between the itself, that can we find some way to do things in the future using technology that we can find a better balance between the natures. Because now we have also 100 and something years experience to make things just using nature, and it creates the massive problems what we have in everywhere in the globe now. So
have you used any biomimicry principles in your own work?
Well, it's more about maybe it's more about to try to understand, for example, how the animals lives in the nature or using the nature that way, that that I don't want to copy, for example, the shapes or that kind of. Do you understand? I don't want to create nature looks like architecture, but of course I try to understand how, for example, the nature behaving or growing or working, and understand, can we find the solution using that data somehow for architecture.
Okay. In the recently concluded, actually not concluded, still going on, COP26, COP26 conference in Glasgow, which is going on right now, which is addressing climate change and its impacts on the world. One of the phrases that is being used extensively is what is called carbon colonization. No, the new colonization is Western countries, after messing up the environment for a long time, are now putting rules for developing countries not to on pollution norms and so on, and threatening them with trade tariffs if we don't comply. I agree that the whole world has to transition to a low carbon future, and we should not be taking embedded carbon out of the ground like we do in petroleum and gasoline products and burning it up every day and putting the carbon back into the atmosphere. And rather, we should look at technology which is more carbon neutral, like, maybe direct conversions of. The argument can go on for a lot, saying that solar power itself comes from solar cells, which are made using power from thermal power plants which burn coal. So the argument can be endless, but at some point, we have to understand that architecture and construction materials, I think, have to be radically reimagined and find ways in which we stop releasing embedded carbon back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So how does your country and how does your experience look at a low carbon future for the world?
Oh dear, that's a big question, of course. And of course, well,
so you raised the point that 35% of all emission in the world comes from the construction industry, right?
Yes, yeah, I understand that very well. But basically, of course, I think that it means that our system must totally change many ways. That's because the old economy works also that way, that we just using the ground and using the things and don't care at all what's happening after that. Okay. So everything is. I think that it means that we must find the low carbon solutions, and it can also be using the natural materials, but it can also be very technical solutions also. But it's also a question about how we optimize also the for example the structures and everything. That's because now we overusing also things in many places. For example, the construction perspective, but. I think that we are in that kind of reality that we must just do things different way. We don't have any options, and it means that, of course, the Western countries, what is really the responsibility to show the direction, that show the things to do better, and I also believe that all crises, they open the new possibilities for the develop solutions, but also make a new economical solution, economical growing even. If we can respond, if we can find a better way to do things, I think it comes like a big business also in many ways. So it's not only problem, it's also great possible to create the better solutions in the future. I believe for that. So I think it's also for the India perspective, if you have a great solution, better than we never have been, it's also great business for the future markets. So it's absolutely, it's not only negative thing, but there's many ways to find the better solutions, I believe also.
All right, thank you. See, what we are facing in India is that we feel that maybe, on one side, we have a lot of access to technical tools like Mr. Parikh showed us, and all kinds of software to help us optimize. But what we are finding is that people are trying to build much more than they require. And the idea of wastage, the idea of excess space just to show off, maybe, I don't know why they do it, but people in India are really building really big houses in an unsustainable kind of way. So but what I find is, if you start going to look at, say, space exploration and habitats that are created for, the people are working on design for how to live on the moon, how to live on the planet Mars, and so on. Do you think that we can learn some lesson? And there you have to be able to understand, like, how do you store and use energy? How do you, give the balance between work and play? How does somebody get their daily exercise in a controlled environment? And how do you do, what I mean is, how do you multitask in a space many times rather than just reserving it for one kind of use? Do you think we are doing enough on this planet to be able to make a more, what I call a small is beautiful kind of philosophy? Do you think that we are doing enough on planet Earth as architects to promote this kind of lifestyle where waste is not allowed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's well, I think one problem is, of course, that people are human behaving is like a endless. We will everything, so there's no limitation for that. But of course, if there's a good way and good understanding that, I also believe that, for example, as more or less things, but better is it's more a starting point and make a lot of not so good things. So if you have, for example, the very well designed or very well planned house, it doesn't need to be so big that it works so well anyway. It's more effective way to use the space if there is a good solution behind for your for example, your apartments. So I think that's absolutely good thing. But it's also thing what I think we make some kind of like a mistake in the globe, that we copy the same solution everywhere. So it means that, for example, our industrial time, we make similar houses or similar things in everywhere in the globe, and doesn't take care for the local possibilities or local materials or whatever. I think that creates a huge problem in the global perspective. So it's also somehow understand the local possibilities, local climate situation, and all kind of things. It's very, I think somehow we must look a little bit back, but using that know-how for our future solutions also. So I don't mean that we must go back in the earth and go under the earth and live there. I mean that it's important to somehow understand what is the good solution in the local perspective, and using for new solutions also. So it means that if you build a really interesting future solution in, for example, in India, it doesn't mean that you transport the wood material from Finland and make the wood building there and say that that's an ecological building. So it's more about what comes in the close, and somehow it's possible to use the local materials, for example. So I believe that we must find that kind of like solutions in the future.
Okay. The ongoing pandemic that is now, looks like it's the beginning of a slide. It looks like the beginning of an inevitable end. And the bell has sounded for the world saying that wake up, you know. So
Mhm.
how do you think architects, and I feel that architects have tended to be very diva like in their practice, they express themselves a lot rather than what society wants. But I think the pandemic is starting to show that design can help create the post-pandemic planet, and people who architects should become more uh, expert in designing complex systems rather than just a standalone product, and self-regulating buildings rather than just iconic buildings. The word iconic is used too many times already. Understand the ecology of the entire ecosystem rather than just the physical impact of their one single project. So how do you think technology can be used to innovate in this particular area, and how do you change the thinking of architectural designers to think more at a global impact scale rather than just their project scale?
Yeah, it's also I think it's a good question. Is there, for example, this pandemic, is this enough big or enough bad that it really changed things? Just because I think that for the history, for example, the last 2,000 years is a little bit like that. That there must be really amazing bad disaster or war or something would really change the direction for the solutions, or we must really find the way to survive. So I think that's a little bit too well, I hope that it's a little bit too light for that perspective that really change things. But of course it changed things that way that that people realize that okay, everybody doesn't need to pack, for example, the big cities, and people can live maybe in the other location and take care for the work, and maybe it's even better that if the structure of the country is not focusing too much for the just few big cities, just because in pandemic perspective it really creates a very bad situation. So maybe it changed a little bit the way or places where the people lives, and the reaction what's happening in the Western countries is also that okay, people need a little bit more space. Also, they are not possible to live so small apartments, or they need a place where they're working and talking in the Skype or Zoom or whatever. So it changed a little bit how the people use the for example, the homes. They're working the home and using the homes in different way. So it means that it creates a different kind of needs on the future also for the solutions. And of course, it's very ineffective way to do cities and buildings that way, that you just build the houses for the living and working place for the working, and everything is separated. And if you think that people are working, they are not working, they are not home, and so it's not very effective way for the use the space or buildings in the future. And if you look at big scale, I think that we should use the buildings more effective and more time, and that kind of separation is not effective. But in the future, if we living working in the same place, it's a more sustainable way also to build the buildings, just because they are more needed. But that's other topic.
Yeah.
So I think that it changed, but it may be not dramatical way. That's the reality. So.
Correct. And the pandemic has also been also has made us rethink the functioning of our cities itself, right? And how cities and buildings and human interaction has changed. And there is a new word for it now, rather than just we used to call it the digital experience. Now we have something called, like what we are doing right now is what we want is the phygital experience, which is like PHY digital experience. Like, it's physical, the hybrid between physical and digital. And like you mentioned, we had a lot of these tools that help us navigate this, but we still are a little taken aback by only seeing other people in postage stamp size images on a screen. We've still not got used to completely this phygital way of working. But I think that phygital is here to stay. The other thing that you hear in cities today is that, you keep hearing about this smart city, smart city. Unfortunately, you never hear anything about smart architects or smart bureaucrats who makes looks like only the cities have to become smart without the bureaucrats and the politicians and the architects also having to become a little smarter. So do you think that, the new tools that we are used to in the last couple of years now can help us how to experience our neighborhoods physically and digitally? How can it improve the quality of the cities that we live in by using technology?
Oh yeah, no, it's also a little bit what's happening if you are sitting down and there's 10 people in the same table. I think that at least 8 of 10 they look the mobile phone all the time. So they are not physically, they are not on that location. In the mentally, they are somewhere else. But that's also very interesting what's happening in the last 10 years. The people basically they are always a little bit somewhere. They are somewhere else using the technology for that. And of course, we can make a better, I think, a smart cities. Well, the smart architect is also needed. All kind of things are needed, but it's it will change, of course, things how the things are reacting. For example, the lighting, all that kind of things. But they are so small scale of things. I think that maybe we should change even the thinking. What is the building? If the building is movable, smart, flexible, some kind of system or microorganism that can grow and going smaller, it comes like a smart city. So it's reacting needs somehow. So if you can create using technology and create that kind of things, what can somehow reacting different kind of needs, I think that's a smart solution. It's smart cities and smart solutions in the future. But yeah. So I believe that there's a lot of possibilities, but of course there's of course also a lot of things what is difficult to need. It must big thinking behind.
Most people's fondest memories in life rarely involves technology, but is focused more on experiences. So really speaking, technology can enhance experience, but I don't think it should become the reason why of existence in a city. We are, like, for instance, most countries now have apps which help you navigate mobility and transport within the city, but it's not the mobility itself, right? So the question to you I have for you is that how can we as architects contribute to the humanizing technology in design, or do you feel that it will always be something outside design that we only use to create spaces?
Well, yes, it's how to really do it. I think there's a good ideas and good space and architecture. There's always needed. It doesn't matter about the technique. So just because what I react that it was happening, for example, for myself, I can traveling at all in the last 2 years, and I really miss the buildings and experience the, for example, the use in the city and see the people. So somehow there's always that kind of needs behind. Either we use the technology and even we use that kind of communication. So I think that's anyway the physical things are needed, but I think that it's also what's happening for the manufacturing happening, that kind of things, that there's only few people in there. For example, the car factory, there's only few people who really make a manual work anymore in the big factory. So it technically will change our, for example, designing process and everything that way, that okay, there's always need for the big thinking and creating the great things, but that kind of like a manual repeating work, I think it will be disappear in the future, even the architectural designing. So of course there's a big changes. There will be big change to using the technology, for example, in our future.
Okay, I have one last question for you. All of us keep saying technology is great and fantastic and how it going to help us lead a better life. Is there a dark side to technology? Is there a flip side to using technology for design? Is there a dark side?
Yes, of course, there's a dark side. We have also experience for the dark side last 100 years. So it's also a risk that we develop the solution too fast or make it that kind of what really make a big disaster later. What we don't have time to test or we don't have experience. So I believe that kind of things are always the risk or dark side.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to summarize by saying that, you know, architects are so used to building in the traditional way, and we have to learn to rethink how we approach design itself. For instance, the example that we discussed that, you know, why can't architects make buildings out of extruded plastic? Why can't buildings grow like trees? Why can't buildings be self-sustainable in energy requirements? I think we have a long way to go. And I think the next generation of architects will be confronting a bunch of questions which are not exactly the questions that my generation had to deal with, but to understand how to work in a resource-strapped world and how to create a carbon-neutral planet. I think these will be big challenges, and I think technology is going to help us how to do this. So at this point, I'd like to hand the presentation back to Anil and Apoorva, and thank you very much for being a part of this conversation. And I would like to hand over the floor back to Apoorva.
Thanks, Naresh. Yeah, thanks, Naresh. That was very incisive and precise questions. Anssi, I'd like to step in. I'm the founder of the group. In terms of CLT and modular approach, how viable is that for a country like India?
Well, I think that's absolutely. But I think it needs it needs a little bit a different kind of like a material or technical solution. But I think that for the affordable housing or big scale solution, it could be very, very interesting to make a big scale solution for example, in India.
So what's the difference in pricing in terms of, you're saying it's affordable between a traditional concrete construction and a CLT approach?
It's about same price. There's no big difference. It's about same price, but of course it depends what you're comparing. That's because it makes the pollution. It makes possible to make a different kind of solution than, for example, concrete building. So if you make it exactly the same kind of concrete building, can be more expensive. But of course you can make a different kind of building using the concrete cheaper. So, but it's also important to use the material possibilities for the cost perspective also.
What about safety and stuff like that? Because your Pukuoka, how do you pronounce it? Pukuoka. That project has won many prizes. So, and in terms of it also retains heat itself. It's almost like it's, you don't need too many other aspects to it. So, in terms of there is fire retardant materials. How do you ensure? Because I'm quite fascinated by using that in India.
Well, basically, of course, when we started the first one, there was just changed the fire regulations that way that it's possible to build the higher buildings to use the wood material for the primary structure. So the fire regulation changed, but of course we must make that kind of like a fire together with the fire expert, that kind of like a simulations and all kind of calculations that we prove that the solution is good. But well, it's and we don't use the sprinkler system in Finland, for example, that kind of apartment building. So we use the sprinkler and also make a fire that kind of like fire calculations, but we optimize the solution and also prove that it's a fire safety. But basically, of course, we believe that it's more safety than typical apartment building, just because typically what's the problem is that the all furniture and things burning in apartments and there comes smoke and it comes dangerous for the people who live there. And in this kind of case, it's because of the fire safety and this sprinkler system, it's more safety than typical apartments indeed.
So you also have a research lab within your group. So what kind of new materials are you working with? Is it just timber or cross-laminated timber, or are you working with other materials too?
We basically, I think basically we use all kind of material as architects always. So it's not only limited to using the wood, but of course, if the wood is important rule, it may be 60-70% of our working is wooden buildings. That's because we believe that we can find a new kind of like a solution. It's somehow push the borders and testing the things is also very important part of the architecture rule, I think so. So that way we using the wood in this Nordic project, but of course, for example, we just get ready one project in Spain. We use the local stone for that, and just a little bit the wood, just because there's no wood, so it's more natural. So somehow I believe that it's also very important to understand the local conditions and possibilities also at the same time.
Yeah, because I have a holiday home in interior India, in Maharashtra, where we made the entire home with available stone, ready stone in the area. It was red stone, and we used natural bricks which were made from mud, you know, and then made in kilns which were, what do you call it? Very, very primitive kilns, and and that was brilliant. But of course, we pumped it in with ACs. We filled it up with refrigerators. So there is a lot of natural materials which can be used. But it was fascinating listening to you. And you know, are you looking at India in a further way, or are you just looking at are there other low-income countries or developing countries like India where you've actually put this into practice, your CLT solution?
Well, of course, India is very interesting, and big questions and big solutions are needed. So, of course, we look in India. Why not? But of course, Apurva just invited me, and I'm of course very, very curious about what kind of things we can find. So why not? I'm absolutely interested what we can helping for the India or India architects or our colleagues. But I also believe that it's very important somehow. There's always needed to be deep understanding for the local possibilities and local conditions and what's happening there. So there's always needed for the cooperation if we do something. So there's needed somebody who are in local and understand the local things in the same time.
And are there other countries like India where you've worked in, similar to India, whether it's in Africa or whether it's in?
Well, we are not working in Africa, but we are working in Asia, in Japan, but it's not in India. But mostly our works are in the Nordic countries and just something very selective what we have now creating in the US or Spain or for example in Japan. So I'm not researching India that I must go there, but I think it's absolutely fascinating and interesting culture and big questions.
Okay, I'm going to ask you another last question before we move on. Are there any of the materials you know worldwide which are being used, and any technology which is fascinating you?
Well, as we talked earlier, that okay, our building way to build is very primitive. We talk about the technical things and so on. I'm somehow interesting to find that kind of like using the natural materials, but you make it like a very using the 3D printing or something. But it's we just researching to find the way to using the local material, but using the high technological behind that. So that's always a little bit the same questions everywhere.
All right. Thank you very much. And it's wonderful having you. Thank you for waking up so early in the morning and being a part of this. I can understand you're in CET, right? You're in Central European time. So that's not the best of. How's the weather there?
Well, it's not, it's just -2. So
wow.
Not very cold, just because it can be even -20 or something this time. But yeah, climate change, the winter comes warmer and warmer.
Okay, fantastic. Nice chatting with you, and it's been wonderful. We look forward to possibly you entering India with affordable housing, which is what the country needs a lot, and not similar pricing as traditional methods of construction. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You have a good day.
So before we close, we have last 2 questions from the audience. Naresh sir or Anssi sir, either of you can take this. I would read out the first question that we have from our audience. Is there a scale restriction to Sapphira for finding the carbon footprint analysis, or is it open-ended?
Yeah,
Oh,
Anssi, that's
yeah.
a question for you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think there's many ways for the try to understand that, and I think that basic problem is that when we make a calculation, we always fighting that, okay, what is the really effect, how it really affects for the nature, and the rules are a little bit open in the worldwide, and there's a quite different kind of way to for example calculate the things still. I realized that, for example, in Asia, in Japan, they don't have the APD, that kind of data, even different materials. So we have a very different kind of perspective for that. But maybe I didn't understand everything. So
no, what he said is there a space constraint in terms of calculating the carbon footprint? If you're looking at a, let's say, is it covering 1,000 square meters, or will it be limited to a few kilometers, within which you're building a project, or is there a space constraint? My understanding, Naresh, am I right in that?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with this, the use of this tool, but I don't think there is a space constraint. I don't think should matter. So
may I Harsh this side. So as this tool is concerned, most of these building performance analysis nowadays done on the cloud computing basis. Right, so hardware is not a limitation. Like you just need to throw out whatever the infrastructure, the digital model you have created. So you can time can be kind of a constraint, but not the space. If you have time, sometimes these kind of analytics can run for hours as well. But I don't subscribe that it has any space limitation.
But I believe also that if you calculate a very huge one, it comes more and more tolerance there. So of course, if you do it smaller area or smaller thing, you can make it basically more precisely, just because it's also make that all mistakes they're going bigger if you make it very huge.
Absolutely correct. I agree.
Yeah. So you're saying smaller the space, the more accurate the analysis and the results.
Well, it depends, of course, too what you use, but basically, of course, you can get it maybe more. There's less mistakes or less, but just because you can get the idea, you can get the size of the difference. It's just one, of course, the queer meter what you compare, for example, different material between the different materials. But basically, I believe that there must be some kind of sense what kind of size you use. So basically, it's more easy that you just calculate one building. It can be also big building, but it's just building out, and maybe that's more safe. But anyway, it depends, of course. So
if you're doing a community, you do it building by building, rather than if you're doing a community project, you do it building by building rather than doing the entire area.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Basically, if you want to make it very precisely, it's like that. But of course, it's possible to make it like a big area thing, and we also think that, okay, we can, in Yokotai case, we can also develop the tool that way that you can make a calculation one block or bigger area. So it means that there's also combination about taking down for the buildings, just because it's also big part of the ecological footprint, that if you must take down the buildings before you build the new ones. But there comes more and more different kind of like aspects and also mistakes if you go like a bigger scale.
All right.
One more point I want to add here. I'm sorry. Depends what kind of analysis you want to carry out for this overall building performance. So if it is, let us say, the complete community, then we try to basically look at the overall environmental aspect in a macro way, right? But if you're talking about a particular space or a building to be analyzed, then and what is the level of detail and developments are included inside that, that makes a lot of difference. So you got to pick and choose that what is the level of analysis and what kind of expectation you have. You just can't throw everything into it and expect it to come out. So depends. Wider areas, you are looking at the mass models, If you're going at the specific areas with a higher level of detail, better you can choose buildings.
Fantastic. Yeah,
We
I
have
hope we've
one
answered the question. Yeah, I hope we've answered the question asked.
We have one question for Naresh, sir. What would be your advice for young students and budding architects in regards to technology? Some tips that we should remember before we proceed into the professional world. This is a question from a budding student, I assume.
See, technology has to be always seen as an enabler. It's not an end in itself. And technology is a very evolving space. So you shouldn't get also stuck to one kind of technology. I think the trick is to be flexible. But what I would advise young people is that look at innovations in other areas of human endeavor and see how technology has changed the life of so many people. For instance, one of the things all of us do without thinking about the safety aspects of or anything else is take an aeroplane flight, fly in an aircraft, and we just walk into an aircraft. And it's sometimes when you think about it, it's quite scary that it's just a little pipe with 2 engines attached to it, and we can't even understand how such a big thing flies in the air in the first place. So, I mean, of course, there is science behind it, but you will also know that aircraft, for instance, are the most optimized human habitats ever made because they have to be very light and they have to be very strong and they have to last a long time, right? So if you learn lessons from how aircraft is designed and apply those lessons to buildings, how we design buildings, I really think that would make a lot of contribution to the world. I was also discussing with Anssi, just the simple, humble motor car that we are all used to. The cheapest motor car available, the cheapest car available has sliding windows which work without a problem, is leak proof for most of its life if you look after it. It also has a climate control environment inside without you thinking about it too much. And it also moves from place to place. So if you look at a car, it's typically 5 feet by 10 feet in size. That's about 50 square feet, right? And you can think of it as moving real estate. How is it that we're able to create an entire room in one day, and we take 6 months or 1 year to build a building? So we have to learn from other industries and learn from other technologies how to make architecture more responsive to technological change and find ways to assemble buildings maybe rather than build them in the traditional way, in a sequential traditional way. If you learn all these things, and also I think the use of tools like what Mr. Parikh pointed out earlier, to be able to visualize and to be able to quickly look at options of what to do, I think this will only get better. And I'm waiting for the day when hybrid reality and tandem reality, these are the two new words which I hear a lot today, is that I'm able to take, when I get a commission to do a building, I and the client wear hybrid reality headsets, and rather than showing him plans and elevations like we normally do, I'll be able to hold his hand and take him for a walk through his proposed new building. So I'm looking for that kind of technological innovation too, as the next step of architectural presentation and visualization. I think it will be here very soon. Hybrid reality is already a reality. And now tandem reality along with hybrid reality is going to become the next big thing.
Yeah, Naresh, I'm going to ask you a question which somebody was asking yesterday. She put out the question that she is a commerce graduate, but is an amateur graphic designer, and loves doing, constructing, and loves doing building drawings and designing. Yeah. So what career can she choose in architecture? She's a commerce graduate. She's not a qualified architect.
Well, I think unfortunately the problem is it's a professional qualification. So she can probably, to build a building, you also need to understand that it has to be safe and it has to stand properly, and you have to learn this, unfortunately, for 4 or 5 years in college. But what she can do is probably get more involved with the interior design side of things and understand how to learn architecture through that route. And by joining an interior design studio, there's a lot of application for graphic design as well as communication design and user experience design in these areas. And I think that's a good way to get started. But if she's really serious, go back to college and get an architecture degree.
I didn't ask her age, so I can't tell you. I know age is no parameter to go back to college on.
No, but now you can do it online. So
okay, great. I mean, it's not a parameter. I know people who are 70 who are studying now, studying all over again. I know the CEO of an agency called Dentsu is going back to Harvard to study. He's given up his Dentsu Aegis, the agency. Ashish Basin.
How old is he?
He's in his late 50s.
Excellent.
So he's given up his job and he's going to go back to Harvard to study. And working for a Japanese company, wants more knowledge. Anyway, pleasure talking to you like always, and pleasure, Anssi. It was great listening to you, and thank you, Imani, and the audience for tolerating the questions I put forth. Thank you.